This is the Smart Buildings Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 292. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 292 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to work with IT groups. So all the resources from today's podcast can be found at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/292. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/292. All right, so up to this point, we have been talking about managing our building automation projects. We've talked about releasing from sales to operations, doing submittal creation, lining out our subs, installing, programming, graphics, etc. Now we're going to talk about a topic that wasn't really that big of a deal when I first started back over a decade now in this trade, and has become a bigger deal. We're going to talk about working with information technology groups. The first thing we need to understand about information technology and information technology groups and working with them is that it's going to be different depending on three factors. One, what type of project is this? Is this an existing building? Is this a new building? What type of project, right? Because that will determine kind of who you have to get involved with. There's going to be a different level of involvement on a simple new construction project versus a complex retrofit at a hospital. Which brings us to number two, what type of project? So what kind of project is in, is it new construction or existing construction? Now, what type? Like, is it or what type of building rather, not project. Is it a hospital? Is it an office building? Is it a school district, etc.? Those are going to determine what level of complexity and what level of IT involvement is going to occur. And the third thing we need to consider is what type of technology are we using? IP controllers, remote access, wireless networks, all that fun stuff. That's obviously going to have much more IT involvement than, a standalone wall-mounted thermostat that's electromechanical in nature. It just will. So how do we work with these IT groups? Well, first I want to talk through kind of what the IT groups are. So we have the traditional help desk. These are the folks that are going to help work through any base level IT issues. You're not going to typically get involved with help desk except for in like service environments where you're trying to troubleshoot potentially some IT issues and their level 1 support. Then we have the system administrators. You're going to typically get involved in these folks when you're standing up virtual servers, standing up desktop environments, trying to get added to the Active Directory for like DHCP, stuff like that. Then we have the network group, both the engineers, the network administrators, and the designers. You're going to get involved with these folks when you need IP addresses, when you need routing, when you need to set up a wireless network, when you need to set up your IP control network, etc., and somewhat on remote access. Then we have our cybersecurity group. These folks are responsible for security policies, procedures, and controls that are implemented across information technology systems. So you're going to get involved with these folks when you're trying to remotely access the network or maybe get your building automation system approved to sit on their network. Then you have the database folks. These folks are going to be responsible for managing the database. So you're going to manage the database, you're going to stand up databases, you're going to virtualize your database, anything database. Well, that is going to go to the database folks. And then there's enterprise architecture. And you don't really get involved with these folks unless you're doing like complex, super duper smart, MSI work, right? You're doing super complex, tying into business systems and building systems and all these things. Then you'll get involved with those engineered. Why did that just lose? I just totally lost my train of thought here with the enterprise architects. I don't know, man, it has been a long day. So those are the groups that we're going to get involved with. Now let's talk through the journey of our project, and let's talk through a couple projects here and what IT involvement may look like. So you got a commercial office building. You got a baseline IP controller on the roof, on a rooftop unit, and you got a bunch of VAV boxes on MSTP wiring. you need an IP address. And this commercial office building, they don't have an IT group. So guess what? You're going to be ending up most likely calling the cable provider and getting an IP drop for you, so that if you want remote access. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of just creating your own IP address with your own private subnet. And if you want to learn more about IT, you don't understand what subnets are, private subnets, etc., then definitely check out our IT course. You can find out more at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/292. All right, that all being said, let's now talk about what if we had, like a major building and there were IP controllers, hundreds of IP controllers, and we wanted remote access, and we wanted a virtual server, and we wanted a database. How would we coordinate this? Well, oftentimes you've got an issue. You got this new building going up, and there's no IT involvement typically until certificate of occupancy. They typically will not start to move in their IT gear until the certificate of occupancy is approved, and at that point, they'll start to move in their IT gear, which means your involvement with IT is largely dependent on the warranty phase. So, okay, you've got this building, you don't have IP addresses, what do? You don't have virtual servers, what do you do? Well, you got to stand up all sorts of temp networks, right? Sometimes you have to actually physically stand up a temporary network. Other times you just have to go and use some, unmanaged switches and just give some temporary IP addresses to your devices, get them communicating enough. But at some point during this process, and it's normally during kind of percent of completion, 70, 80%, you're going to have to get involved via the owner's rep with the IT group. And you're going to have to work with them to go and get your network set up. So you have to determine your IP addresses. You'll have to go and subnet out, kind of figure out what your IP address range needs to be, and then go to them and present your requirements. It's a big thing with working with IT these days. You used to go to IT and you'd say, this is what I need, and they'd do all the work for you. Nowadays, it's largely where if you don't do the pre-work and come to them and be like, I need this subnet with this range of and this many hosts, etc., they are typically going to just bounce you back and you're not going to get what you need. So that's just working with the network, folks. Now we got to get our server, right? So now we got to work with our system administrators. I hope at this point you're seeing why I took the time to tell you about the different roles. Because if you go the network guy and you try to work on a virtual server, they may entertain you, but you're not going to get anywhere. They have zero approval to stand up a virtual server for you and zero influence over it. And oftentimes they may not even know who the system admin folks are. So you've got this virtual server you need stood up, or maybe you need some sort of software appliance added to something. You need to work through system admin folks, and the requests go through them. Now, sometimes you could just bring on your own server and then just transfer that over to them. Sometimes you have to use the IT group server and their requirements. So be cognizant of that. Just because the spec says you should use XYZ from whatever manufacturer's catalog page the specs were given to them, is what typically gets put in by the engineers. Just because it says you should use this does not mean that complies with the company or the customer that you're working for's IT policies. I want to repeat that. Just because the spec says you need this type of server, or you need this type of switch, or you need this type of network, that does not necessarily mean that the spec is in compliance with the IT requirements of your customer. So you really want to narrow those IT requirements down, typically through an RFI, RFC process through the contracting tier, to ensure that you understand, hey, we're providing a physical server. Does this meet the standard that the customer would accept? Otherwise, you'll most likely not be able to get it on site, get it supported, get the server on site, get the server supported, get the server set up. You often will not be able to do that without meeting the standard of customer expectations. So from there, we have our database. Pretty much same old, right? You got to stand up the database. Now, in order of importance, I'm kind of listing out how this goes, right? We typically will get approval for network stuff right away. That's usually the first thing that goes in. Servers and databases tend to follow that. which is typically immediately followed by cybersecurity policies and appliances that get put over that. So if we think of the network as the bones, we think of the servers and databases as kind of the muscles, and then cybersecurity and administration as the skin and all of that fun stuff, right? So that's how this creature gets built from an IT perspective. So we talked about IT networks, we talked about servers, we talked about databases. And it's at this point that any cyber policies, any things like that that need to be applied are implemented. Specifically, we're going to look at starting to close ports down, logical ports. We're going to start to look at making sure our systems are patched at least to the level they can be. We're going to start to make sure we have certificates for authenticated communication installed, and we're going to start to implement whatever other cybersecurity policies, procedures, or appliances are required. So policies, right? Policies are things that need to be done. Procedures are how to do them. And appliances, or also known as controls, are the logical, administrative, or physical implementations that are going to secure the building automation system and secure the IT network and IT assets. So there you have it, a rather short episode, but it should give you an approach on how to think through information technology, who you work with, how you're going to approach them. Definitely have a lot more resources on information technology in our IT for Building Automation Professionals courses, as well as looking at our IT podcasts and IT mini courses. You can check all of that out at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/292. Once again, that's podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/292. Thanks a ton for listening, and I'll see you, or talk to you rather, in the next episode. Take care. Next episode.